Stamp like a notary from every country that I went. In a country like this, from the others you've been sent. Black is beautiful. We gon' make the motherland hit. Hey, hey, we gon' play it out until they feel it. Hey, hey, we gon' put the roof up the killer. Hey, hey, we gon' play that motherland down.
Let's have one more big round of applause. Yeah. So welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you so much.
It's wonderful to have you here. We've been really excited and looking forward to this.
Thank you. Hold on, I gotta make sure.
I know. So Nissim was saying to me, just in the wider world where he moves, masks are a thing of the past, and Tufts is the last bastion.
Yeah.
And I'm told, guys, that it's coming off almost soon, just not yet.
Guys.
So I really appreciate that. If you need
I empathize. I sympathize. I don't empathize. I sympathize for you guys, but I was telling Rabbi, by my neighborhood, it was like Corona never existed the whole entire whatever. I don't know if that's a good thing.
If you need occasionally to take a breath of fresh air, you can let it drop. So
drinking. This is what I do on the airplane anyway.
Yes, so you spent a lot of time on airplanes. So you were telling me that you're here. You're off to New Jersey for Purim.
Right. Purim night.
Purim night. Then you're off to Casablanca in Morocco.
Right. Purim day.
Purim day, as one does.
If anybody has any questions about that, talk to Aaron because he booked it. I did not have no idea.
Okay. And then you try to get home for.
I'll be back home for Shabbat.
For Shabbat.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
in Israel.
In Israel with your family.
Right. Yeah.
Who's in your family? How many kids do you have? What's your?
It's my wife and my 6 children. Oh, Hashem.
Wow.
Thank God.
All right.
As I was once famously told by a rapper / DJ, Fat Man Scoop, that's a starting 5 with 1 coming off the bench. So it's what I have at the house.
And so you're doing a lot of traveling.
Yeah, I do a lot of traveling. Oh, for sure.
Do you always try to be home for Shabbat, or is that not possible?
That's usually not. It's not always possible, especially when you're being brought for Shabbatones.
Right.
That usually is not going to be the case, but I try to if I can. Like this one I was happy that it was a bittersweet, right? Because nobody wants to sign up to have your Purim Suda on an airplane, because that's what I have to do in order to go to. So I really was planning on being in New York, Casablanca. I just kind of got in the mix very late. And because they got in the mix, though, I get to go from there, and I get to make it back. But I don't think if I would have drank in New York, I'd have been able to catch the flight the next day back against time. It wouldn't have happened.
You're having a dry Purim.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel for you, man.
Yes, it's going to be a very dry Purim.
You'll make up for it.
Yeah.
You'll make up for it.
Next Purim. Next Purim.
I'm
a Breslov, I got to wait till next Purim already.
So we're going to get on to Breslov. Breslov is a fascinating branch of Chassidut, Jewish mysticism. So I know we circulated a number of your videos, your bio. I know you've gone over this territory many times in interviews, and it's out there. But just very briefly, for those who have no idea, they just wandered in here tonight. Mm-hmm. Who is this Hasidic hip hop artist? What's in very brief? Where did you come
Rabbi
from?
says
Where are you
briefly. I have rabbi syndrome. We don't do anything brief when we start talking. But originally I was born in Seattle to hip-hop parents. Both my mother and my father were part of rap groups that actually pioneered hip-hop in Seattle. So I was born I have yichus, that's how I just say it. I was born into it, basically. It's part of my lineage. And even apart from them, my mother's side, also my father's side, world-class musicians, Played with the Quincy Joneses and Ray Charles, a bunch of other people that this young crowd probably never heard of. But very, very musical family and background. So that part was always there. Also, my parents, had the drug dealing thing going on. Both my mother and my father both sold drugs. And I joke when I say this, but as any other good Jewish boy, I grew up and joined the family business very early on. By 9, I was already smoking pot. I was running with a street gang by the time I was 12, 13. I was expelled from the school district. So life was happening very, very fast. But even all in that, I would always say I was still a very spiritual kid. Had some crazy, weird spiritual cognizance, I guess I would say, even though that wasn't so much presented to me. So my grandfather was a Sunni Muslim, so that was my first introduction to religion, was Islam. My grandfather came, lived with us for about a year. I prayed with him 5 times a day. And then he ended up going back to prison, unfortunately, where he was for the rest of his life. And then by the time, after 13, 14 years old, I converted to Christianity because I went to like a missionary camp. And it's a very, very powerful experience. I really do, still today, I say that camp saved my life because I was headed down a very, very dark path. And then I came back and I was pretty devoted.
Was it really like strict camp?
No, it wasn't strict. I mean, it was more strict. Now, Rabbi, I'm going to be honest with you. They're way more strict than the Jewish camps. Way more strict, but they're way more fun. No doubt about it. I'm sorry, it just kind of went together.
Right.
And the reason why I say that is because I've been to a lot of camps, obviously. There was so much activity going on that you didn't have time to do stuff you weren't supposed to do. You know what I mean? So it wasn't as much like, so to speak, free time, So I think that's why. So it kind of worked out that they were much more strict, but the amount of activity, the thing was like super duper planned out, So that camp was very, very impactful. Came back, started joining Bible study groups and different things like that. And then, naturally, you're back in your own environment. You end up going back to the old things that you do. It took a few years, though. I was very, very, devoted, I think, for many years. And then after that, rap career started to take off. That led me down a darker path because the record labels, there's a big record label that was interested in me, Virgin Records at the time. And I was young. I was 19 years old. So I was ready to go for it. And one of the things they wanted, it's my airplane move. So one of the things that they wanted was more of the gangster rap. 50 Cent was really big at that time. That was like the era of like gangster raps making its way back. And so I went that route insincerely, thinking that I would do it in an insincere, like, I'm not really. And then I started to lose myself. I didn't really know who I was. I was around my girlfriend, I was one guy, my church-going girlfriend. And then around my guys, I was very something else. So eventually that will lead to me putting out the record independent. Label thing didn't happen. I lost my mother of an overdose. My mother overdosed when I was 19, so that was very hard for me. And just trying to make it happen. And then there was one rapper who dissed me. That led to a very hard, scary altercation where a friend of mine tried to take his life. And because they thought I sent him, they were going to come and take my life. So I was either going to have to kill them or they were going to have to kill me. And I did what any other normal person would do. I started praying. And through that situation and putting that behind me is where I sort of started leading. It led me to Judaism, so to speak, because I really started spending a lot of time at home by myself, nobody else around, just studying the Bible. And I spent a lot of time in between that and Rabbi Google, I would say, a lot of researching and just really trying to figure out something that fit me. And I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood, so I always was very interested.
The Sewell Park, is that?
Sewell Park, yeah. Sewell Park, yeah.
And
I'm working this out over here.
What?
I'm working this out over here.
Yeah, go ahead.
You guys are all used to it. I'm not used to it.
Yeah, we're very used to it. No, but you are allowed to take it off to drink or eat.
Okay.
So you can, liberally drink
Right.
if you, right? Well, that's what we do, right? So I want to come to the Judaism in a moment, but what I'm already hearing, what fascinates me is, some people, they're sort of fixed on a particular path, and already like this dizzying array of Islam, Christianity, the street. You're like, it seems like you're straddling these many worlds.
Right.
And obviously, fast forwarding, you ended up as a Hasidic Jew. Mm-hmm. Do you still see yourself as straddling different worlds? Are you deep on the inside, or are you always on the outside?
So it's very good. What you're depicting is, or at least what you're touching on, are symptoms. Why do we straddle? Why do we search? Why do we go through all these different phases? At one point, through my teenage years, I dressed like this. I wore baggy jeans and I wore this. And then by this time, this is already out. Now, some of it has to do with the TV shows you're watching. Okay, that's obvious. But the deeper part of it is we go through this phase of trying to find and search for identity. And we always are looking for the things on the outer to sort of fix when we're really searching for something deep inside. So one thing, like I said, retrospectively, as I've been able to, so to speak, look myself in the mirror more, We'll talk about Breslov Hasidus, so one of our biggest things is a meditation of Hidbodhut. So one of the biggest things is I have at least an hour a day where I have to be very, very honest with myself. I take myself to court, so to speak. So because of that, I'm able to look back and dig into older feelings and emotions, and I became very cognizant of what I was looking for even back then. And even I can realize that I knew it. I was always on this very deep spiritual search. I was always asking. My mother would say, your questions are too deep for me. I don't, my mother just couldn't do the questions. You're like your father, you're deep, I don't, So I was always very into that as a kid, and always trying to search for something, so to speak, that was bigger than myself that I felt I belonged to. So case in point, I remember my 10th grade year coming in from my lunch hour, and I had this moment just out of nowhere. I wouldn't say like epiphany, but it was a trip out, and by this time I was sober. I wasn't smoking anything, okay? And I was looking at all of my friends, and I started to feel like I knew something that they didn't know, and I felt so out of place. But I felt there's this longing, this deep sense of belonging somewhere and not really knowing where. It was just out of the blue. Nothing happened, I ate a chicken nugget, the whole thing stopped, right? But it was, for me, my natural thought was somehow maybe God's trying to communicate something to me and I need to be aware. So I got involved in more Bible study groups or whatever, but I was searching constantly for something, right? There was something that I felt like I was missing. And I think that was just the symptoms of all of those things. So when I look at it today, it's much more of a directed focus of what it is that I'm searching, but is it still the same manifestations? Yes, it is the same manifestation of trying to, you can hear that. I just did 2 songs today that sound nothing like each other, right? I'm a musician. So I'm always probing. We have a beautiful book called the Mesilat Yesharim, The Path of the Just, I think it's in English, where the author there, the Ramchal of Moshe Luzzatto, writes over there that just like one needs to investigate and probe himself, like if you're looking for a lump, God forbid, of cancer or something, you have to probe and to feel, to check. So in the same way, a person has to check themselves inner in a very deep way, to check and probe. What is it that I'm really after? What is my true intentions when I'm doing? So I do feel like it's the same thing, but it's less looking for it out there. I'm looking for it more so inside, trying to find that missing piece.
And is the work ever done?
I starting to look like no. Because once you get there, it's like
deeper.
God moves it back a little bit more. And I used to do this to my kid. I tortured all of my kids the first 3, 4,
4 kids,
months or whatever. And I used to do that. You put something shiny. I used to have a phone like a BlackBerry, put it there, and they try to grab it, and then move it again, and they try. And then to them, it's just like a game until they start crying. And my wife said, "Why are you doing that to them?" But I sort of sometimes feel like God does this. We can talk about it later when we go into the rest of and why. But but the search is almost never done because there's something that we have to feel like, and we have moments where you get there and you feel like you got it, but then it was a little bit deeper. It's almost like you're being drawn to a certain place.
I think this is so.
Sorry if I'm too deep. My
We
mother
said
told
we're
me
going deep
this
tonight.
also.
Yeah. I'm hearing you. I think it's so pertinent. I think we're all searching for identity. I don't want to speak for college students, right? That I can't do that. But if I'm reflecting, often what I hear is that this is a really difficult age to find identity.
Right.
And the reality is when you become my age, it doesn't become any easier, right? I think it's something we're always looking for. And what you're speaking to is this inner search for identity, in which you're defining yourself on your own terms,
Right.
as
Absolutely.
opposed to what others.
As opposed to others. And that was the strongest part about coming to Judaism, right? Because it only happened. So if I would say what was the biggest difference between, my run in Christianity and my run in Islam, which are both beautiful faiths in their own respect, was that there was always someone there to tell me, this is for you. This is what you're supposed to be doing. With Judaism, there was nobody invited. In fact, when I tried to come, it was like, you sure you want to do this? So when you really separate yourself, and it was great for me because I got out of my house. Like I said, I had an unfortunate tragedy with my mother, but still my stepfather had family. But I got away from everybody, and it was very, very crucial for me at that time to get away from everybody. Else I wouldn't have been able to hear myself. That's the important thing. It wasn't like about hearing God. I needed to hear myself. I need to hear who am I? And you constantly, because we are social beings and we have friends, we have family, or people that we respect and that we love, it's very, very hard for us to take time sometimes to get to know ourselves. So that was a very, very big reason why I felt like I was clear enough to be able to see that I don't want that. I want this. And I was able to spend time myself to be able to figure that out.
It's solitary work.
Yeah.
Are you comfortable being alone?
Yeah. See, that's the problem. I'm very comfortable being alone. But I'm such a people person that I wouldn't have known that if I would have stayed around people. You understand?
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have known the great benefit. There's a tremendous benefit of togetherness and being together, obviously. But the one of being alone is very hard to explore because, sometimes a person, even if they're alone, they don't like being alone. So we get in the car, so we automatically, I gotta have music. When I have music, I'm dying. Like if I don't have to turn something on, I gotta hear the radio. I have to hear that. It's very hard to ride in silence. Very hard for it. And the whole thing is like, person never stops. Why? Why does it bother me that I can't be alone? I can't have anything else there because what am I running from, so to speak?
Yeah.
So it's a very, very very interesting exercise. I don't know if you guys ever did it, ride in the car with no music, no nothing, no anything, or wherever you are, just to get away from everybody else and just to start listening to what you think. It's very interesting.
So should we dive into Rav Nachman?
We can dive into Rav Nachman.
All right.
Of course.
That's great. So I know you're.
I think we've already been there. But.
We've been there. We're gonna. So I actually before we dive, so Rav Nachman was one of the great founders of the Hasidic movement and lived the very turn of the 1800s.
He was born in 1774. Died in. Let me make sure I did this right now. 1810. He died.
Okay, so
he was 38 years old when he passed away. So if that math, or minimum 1772 to 1810.
Right. And his Chassidut, at least when I was growing up, it was like there were these funny Breslover Hasidim who studied it, and most people didn't know anything about it.
Right.
Today, particularly in Israel, but in large metropolitan places, his Chassidut, his teaching seems like it speaks to a whole range of people.
Right.
What is it in his teaching that inspires you?
Very good question. I think it's sort of what we've been describing up until this point, which we didn't plan, but we just kind of went there.
We're being guided.
We're being guided, for sure being guided. So Rav Nachman's one of his very, very interesting teachings that actually relates to what we're saying is that each person is put into the world to find what it is that they lost. So each person is put here. Hashem took something from somebody, God took something, or something was taken from somebody, and it was put here in the world as sort of a lost and find, and you got to go and find it. You got to go track this thing down. And it's a very interesting thing because when we talk about this whole idea of searching for something, when you have a lost object, we have a teaching, right, from our great sages, It says that before a person's born, they're taught all of the Torah, the wisdom of the Torah, they hit on the mouth, and they come into the world, they forget everything. So you can say that's one of the things they lost. Ramchal again explains in Mesilat Yesharim that there's a tselem, a certain image that each person has to make for themselves of the perfect me. I meditate on this is the perfect me. Every day I measure myself according to that. How far am I? How close am I to that? How far am I? How am that? So you start to, something opens up a little bit. But what Nachman was able to do was there's the old saying that, you know, he during his lifetime he had a big conflict with another rabbi named the Shpoiler Zaidi. There's another Hasidic Rebbe from a different sect, and they had conflict. So they write in the book, Siach Sarfei Kodesh, which is a lot of the different teachings of Breslov. They said, what problem did the Shpoiler Zaidi have with the Reb Nachman? And his followers asked him. They said he came 200 years too early. That when he speaks about the importance of joy and the importance of the way, how do you get back what you lost? It's through simcha, joy, happiness, fighting depression. That there's no despair in the world at all right now. Like that speaks to our world. Who doesn't have something they're sad about it, depressed about it, so many different things that even from my good, don't even let my good, that I'm not achieving the good that I am, that he says, surely you have good in you. Even if I feel like I'm the worst person in the world, surely you have good for you. You're not looking good enough. So I think that was the biggest thing that it speaks now to the world. Like you said, another thing he said, very, very interesting, was a crazy prediction. Rabbi Weinberger in Woodmere, he talked about this at one point. He said that, and I never thought about it before, Breslov has gone viral. We'll say Breslov has gone viral. He said that in many years you're going to see, he was a very small Hasidus back then. They were not very liked, right? Very small. He says, you're going to see in the end of days, people are going to be yearning and they're going to be coming to my kever. He said, you're going to see this. He wrote this 200 years ago. He had an intuition that at the time that his teachings were going to be dispersed, that it was going to be the medicine sort of for this generation. And I feel like it is like most people, they did a study. Somebody had did. I got to ask my friend Adam, I think it was Adam Seville, built this to me. He's probably he's the most quoted rabbi in Judaism. Most people don't know they're quoting him because the teachings have spread so far. They have no idea that they're singing the songs and different things. But that's sort of it. It's that this whole idea of that and never give up, never give up. When I see Tony Robbins, I'm just like, this guy's straight up read Rabbi Nachman. This is all he's reading. You know, all these guys, this motivational speaker, and like, this is what Rabbi Nachman wrote 200 years ago. This whole entire idea of encouragement, and more strengthening. So I think that is what has spread and why people feel like, wow, I really needed that.
He has this profound insight into human psychology without being a trained psychologist.
Without being a trained psychologist. Yeah. Right.
And then he himself suffered terribly from depression.
Right, absolutely. Right. Absolutely. He said even on himself, the only reason why he was able to give it over is because I went through it. He's saying that, which is another reason why I think it's become something that's been so widespread. You never get that in the books that you read of very, very great people, at least not in the Jewish
frailty,
books.
Their vulnerability.
He's very open about the fact that he was vulnerable, that I messed up 100 times in one day, and I had to start over again and again. I had to make another start. Thank you very much, because I was starting to say, you know, the stewardess was coming by, and I...
You got the aisle seat, so you're lucky.
But the whole idea of being able to say that I struggled with this, and I struggled with temptation, and I struggled with all these different things, and I prevailed because I started over and over and over and over and over again, you know. And I know it doesn't sound so humble, because in our world it probably isn't. But he said to the student, he said, you know, when I was you, I wish I had a rabbi like me, you know. Right. He said, because nobody was there to tell me that if I would have just kept going. He said, I just had to fight to realize that. So that was this whole thing of struggling with the depression and fighting. He's saying that I already took all these things head on, so now I'm telling you how to get out of it.
Right. And Sadly, he didn't trust doctors. But my dad, who's a medical professor, says he was wise because in the 1800s, doctors would have killed you anyway. But the other thing he seems to be quite, he spends a lot of time on is the limits of human reason.
Right.
Right?
Right.
But he's got a very interesting relationship with that.
Yeah, very interesting because he very interesting you say that because he reasoned in this world of questioning, of that most questions aren't questions, all right? What has happened? We even do this. We have this for good and for bad, but we also have this in our yeshivas also. The idea of the shakavatari, and some guys, some guys ask a lot of questions because they enjoy what we call the geschmack of asking a question.
Right.
But he didn't really have that question. He just asking a question. The problem is that
he wants to be clever.
He wants to be clever.
Right.
He wants to be clever, and he wants to sound nice, and he really enjoys hearing himself. That's all he has to say. So a lot of times there are things that are not really questions, but we turn them into questions. It could be for some other reason that really I have a different desire. So if I make this a question, and even if I can make it a question, even though everybody knows it's not a question, right? Because like for instance, somebody asks you, how do you know the sky is blue? It's because I saw that it was blue. How do you know that you really saw that it's blue? Who said what is blue, right? It's just like, after that point, it's like, yeah, I'm not going to argue with this guy because he doesn't believe blue is blue. Whatever. Right. I know, what if it's a whole thing's a conspiracy that blue is really blue. So Rav Nachman told a beautiful story. I can't give you over the whole story because it takes some time.
Stories go on and on.
Yeah, stories go on and on. Of the simpleton and the sophisticate. You familiar with this story?
Yeah, but
it's life-changing. So the simpleton and the sophisticate, two very good friends from one city. And the simpleton is this shoemaker, and he's just simple. And not only is he a shoemaker, he's horrific. He sucks at making shoes. His shoes are horrible. His wife tells him he needs to get a different job. Everybody tells him. And then she's asking him, why don't you do like this or that? He says, hey, listen, this is what I do. I enjoy what I do. So he's very, very simple. Sophisticate was brilliant, had a mind that was beyond anything you can think of. Went to study all the wisdoms of the world. He came back and he sees his friend is still a shoemaker, and he just starts to look down on him. You schlump, what do you. So they have a dialogue and they're talking. He's saying that you think you're something. He says, listen. He says that God can bless me and I could be even bigger than you. And he says, yeah, right. You don't even have half the brain. So they go on. They live their lives. And the sophisticate is constantly going from place to place and questioning and reasoning, trying to reason with his mind. And as long as he can't really grasp it and fit it in this box, then it must be that this certain thing it can't fit, because he needs to see the wisdom of what it is. And once he feels like he's conquered it, then it's now small in his eyes. So then he goes to the next level, until all of a sudden he does the exact same thing, like I was saying with the blue. And he says, all of a sudden, the king sends for him. What king? He says, the king of the Medina. Everybody knows it's the king. He said, have you ever seen the king? So he's obviously a servant. He was never. He says, no. He says, wow, you know the king exists? I think the whole thing's a hoax. So he goes on this deep thing. And in the end, the whole time, the sophisticate, he comes for some simple reason. Whatever. He keeps being elevated. And the way the story is, he's like dumb as bricks. But he keeps being elevated. The simpleton.
It's like Forrest Gump.
Yeah, it's like Forrest Gump, completely. Yeah. And he ends up being like almost the viceroy, of the whole entire thing. And he's watching his friend complete depravity, but he's brilliant all the way to his last breath. He can't stop because he has to know that he was the most wise. So Reb Nachman, he made a lot of fun of these things. And what's very interesting is that right around the time of his death was the birth of the Haskalah movement. So he was face to face with a lot of these guys.
Just the Haskalah movement.
The Haskalah.
It's the Jewish. So basically,
an industrial.
So Jews in Eastern European ghettos, encountered the Enlightenment,
The Enlightenment,
like
right.
a good century after everyone else did. So Haskell is the Jewish Enlightenment.
Exactly,
Yeah.
it's the Jewish
Not that
Enlightenment.
they weren't capable, they weren't really allowed out of the ghetto. So
Right, right, right. And so what that led to was interesting conversations. And one of the things that the Jewish ones who had been enlightened would do was go around and make fun of all the rabbis. They asked them complicated questions. And they came to Reb Nachman. That was the wrong door to knock on. So when they came to ask him, and he flipped the question around back on their head, they said, oh, wow. So he would play chess with them and spend time with them and talk to them. And they were able to realize through even his speaking and the way that they talked to them that the questions weren't really questions. So he was very against this overall. He said one time, we have an interesting concept of there's God who creates everything and he's the all-knowing being, but yet there's free will. So many books, he says, have tried to come and explain this. He said even great rabbis, he says, I want you to sell it to me. Sell it to me that there's two things that we're going to be able to find out in this world what that means. He didn't believe that there was an answer in this world, and that it was okay to leave things
so that's
unanswered.
the idea of being comfortable living with
that.
paradox.
Well, yes, with the paradox.
Or questions.
Right, absolutely.
Right?
It's hard for people because there are some people who like to figure it out. I happen to be like the shoemaker. I don't really care. But there are, I see a lot of times, it's very, very hard to not be able to know, which is a natural instinct because one of the hardest, I say even for myself, one of the biggest tortures is not having clarity, right? Is when you don't know what to do. That's really, really, really hard. And I hear as you get older, that becomes even harder. But when you don't have clarity as what to do, it's so torturous as to, how do you move? I don't know. That's a bad place to be. So I understand it's a natural thing. But some of the things that we get hung up on don't have anything to do with what we're supposed to be doing right now, right? So then that's when it becomes, why are we hung up on things that really have no real involvement with what's actually going on right now? Right. So I think that was sort of his thing. And what attracted me, I think, to his teachings more than anything else was they're very action-based, not philosophical. That was his whole thing, is not to be too philosophical. He'll show you I could go there, and then he always comes back to practical advice. Right. How to, what's the manual, this is what you do. So.
Right, it's beautiful. I want to allow a broader conversation.
Absolutely.
I have one more question, but I can hold that back. So let's
you.
open up. The floor is yours, guys. We don't need microphones, just speak clearly. Stand up, maybe just say your name, and fire away. Join the conversation. Yeah.
I was wondering, when you started rapping, did you feel like there were artists that influenced you that were kind of like speaking the word of God or spoke to some of your like spiritual yearnings?
Very good question.
Maybe if you start thinking about
Very good question.
Do you all hear the question? Yes, great.
So it's a good question. The truth is, like Reb Nachman said, when I was you, I wish I would have had a rabbi like me. I wish I would have had a guy that was doing,
You wish there was a Nissim black when you were growing up.
Yeah, I wish there was a Nissim. The truth is that no, I didn't really have and I was scared out of my mind to even return back to music because I didn't think I would be able to keep my religiosity. I was afraid because unlike, some people who grow up, no matter what the religion, they grow up very religious and different things like that. That's all they know. So it's harder for them to see the value in it. Me coming from a completely different world, I found something that I actually enjoyed and really enjoyed the connection that I was having and I was building with God. And I was afraid of losing that. So it was very hard for me. Matisiah was a very famous singer, decided to take a different turn. So that was like, the first thing this is all around the same year that I had come back. And it wasn't just him, he was just the most famous, but there was other Jewish singers that I knew who also had made the same decision, like all within a year's time. So I was like, okay, this is probably not going to be, this is a clear example not to do. But Just some encouragement, and God had to make a miracle for me, or else I would have never believed I was supposed to be doing that. And I ended up coming back to it, and it was just a natural thing. Like, what else to have to talk about now? I can't talk about like I'm in the streets because it just wouldn't have been honest, right? So what honestly started to come out was more spiritual things, and I don't think until I really found my lane until I think it was 2015 or so when I did the Hashem Melech on Gad El-Baz. And that song ended up becoming number 3 on like on the world charts or something like that. And that was when I was like, wow, you know what I mean? Like I could do this and really have an impact like that, you know? And so that was the most encouraging, but I don't feel like I had any, trust me, it was really hard to like lace back up your cleats, so to speak, and I hadn't even been listening to rap because I couldn't even listen to anything that was putting me in that place, you know. So it's very, very hard to do. But so I didn't really have anybody, but you know, I had King David profile. I had this very interesting thing transforming. Like almost all the music I listen to today is completely mellow, calm. There's no drums. I love folk music. I love like completely opposite of what I'm doing. You'd be like, how are you like going from that, and then you do that or whatever. I don't know. This is I listen to all of that, and this is just what comes out of me. So this is weird. So I don't get to spend a lot of time, but I will say in the last year and a half or whatever, I made some connections with some contemporary Christian rappers. Lecrae was one of them, and Derek Mine, a few other guys. I was like, oh, you know, there's something going on here. It's still more in the more super hip hop world for me, but I recently discovered, like, if I could say there's a sound, I think like more contemporary pop Christian music, like, you know what I'm saying, maybe more the playlist that I should be on, you know what I'm saying? I don't know, but there was no actual rappers I felt like I could look up to, which is sad, honestly. I think there should be more people in the inspiration space.
They might come from this crowd.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah, so right here first.
Oh, yeah.
You may have answered this already, but I was curious what the various schools and styles of rap are, and are they analogous in any way to the different schools of Hasidus?
Very good question. Very good question. Depends on who you ask. But I think there's a correlation, if I would say. I'll give a big lahabdil, just say they're not exactly the same. But rap faced a big amount of opposition when it came into being. More so when it hit the gangster rap era. So I'm really not referring to that. Just this new, what is this new thing? And it hits this place of it being very unconventional. It's not the same thing as the traditional R&B world or whatever was going on with black music at that time. So it was met with a lot of opposition. The same way the Hasidic world was met with this opposition because it didn't go in the conventional way of what's coming out of the institutions of Lithuania. So in the same type of way, I think that's the biggest connection. But I can't say that the music itself is Hasidic in nature, for sure not. But there is a very interesting thing about these wild reformations, or what you could say that God does to shake up things, you know, because the more and more, I just recently coming off of a tour during Hanukkah, and the biggest blessing was to be able to see live, especially after sitting home for almost 2 years, doing everything on Zoom, which sucked. But actually being out amongst the people and hearing stories firsthand of how much you've helped people, the music, it's sort of like one of those things that you don't see it until you see the fruits of it later on. It's like, wow, this blossomed into something way bigger than what I could even imagine, right? And in the same world, I'm sure, like I said, Lahavdil in the Hasidic world, and seeing that the effect that it's had, like we're talking specifically about Rabbi Nachman, you don't understand how small this Hasidic was, and how many different Hasidus there was at that time. The fact that this made it out without a sitting rabbi, you know, he died 200 years ago, all the way to today, and it to be growing like a wildfire the way that it is very, very interesting how something like that can happen when it was met with so much opposition. It was a very small group of guys. And, they tell me, back 40 years ago, whatever, every breast woman knew every breast woman. It was like, no, today, in my neighborhood alone, there's like 15 breast schools, right? So it's like crazy if you think about it today, synagogues that there are, how things can spread out, and you see like, wow, you never believe that it can have that much of a reach on other people. So I say that's probably the biggest correlation that I've seen.
I want to do a time check. I know there are a lot of, so maybe we just take a cluster of questions and then you can kind of parse them as you wish. Like three at a go. Can we do that? All right, so we've got one back there. And then, yes.
I had a question. So first off, thank you for being here. Earlier in your talk, you said that you were going down a wrong path when you were younger, but you were saved by a church camp. So my question for you...
Christian camp. That was a Christian camp.
I'm sorry, a Christian camp.
Yeah.
So my question for you is, have you brought your faith back into the communities where people to help possibly improve the lives of people who might be going down the wrong path, your faith-based program?
Okay, so the truth is that in the Jewish faith, as you may be familiar with, we're not very big into proselytizing. So I think one of the biggest things that I've been able to do, I think my biggest outreach, probably back to the black community was my song Motherland Bounce. That was the one I threw to the team, and it's very interesting because I remember after I released that song, right, it was very unconventional for the music that I was doing definitely at that time. So many of my friends from high school was like, oh, bro, like, I get it now. Like, they didn't get you. I didn't get you. You know what I'm saying? Now they get it. I don't know what they got, but they got something. So I ended up, going back home, visiting my family. It was an Israeli TV show that was doing a series on me, and they took me back from my family. It was like a documentary thing, and they took me back. I talked to them. I had been around them like 7 to 8 years prior to. And I went to the hood, went to all my boys and everything, and I was received with so much love and warmth. I mean, the stuff they showed on the documentary was one. The stuff they didn't show was like crazy. And the amount of respect and just love and warmth that I was getting from my friends from the community was crazy to me. So what that turned into, obviously, was I introduced them all to WhatsApp, because nobody had WhatsApp over there. And they only did text messaging and Instagram. And I don't, I'm not so busy on Instagram. So I was telling them, what's that? So after that, I kept in touch. So when everybody has God questions, they say, let me ask you, man, because I don't believe this guy. So somehow I think them seeing my devotion to God, that we were always familiar with people who maybe went to church, and for them it's like this person devoted his whole entire life to God. So I'm going to ask him because he may have so in that type of sense, how to and then there's as guys are coming up, I try to help influence them. Amari Stoudemire is one of them. He actually messaged me today and said we got to learn. So he's not a good friend of mine, and this is how I know, because he's been very open with me and with others about how much, me being on my path may have helped him, which I wouldn't have known that, because he was already on his journey, I was on my journey in a different time, but that by way of you just sort of doing your thing and being devoted, you can also be helping other friends, and not just saying, other guys, L'chaim OG's, another rapper coming up in the Jewish world, and it's being able to see a lot of these guys grow up that, just by way you have influence on people just by being devoted to God, and just like, oh, this is another guy who's like me, comes from where I came from, whatever, this is possible, I get a lot of physics from them as well, so, a lot of strength from them as well. Another thing, to answer your question, which I think I may have already forgot. Oh, civil rights movement. Yeah, see, I'm sharp. So what's interesting about that is that was something that I came across. You have to realize that I really grew up, not only did I grow up like in the hood of Seattle, people like, oh, there's a hood in Seattle, there's a hood everywhere, okay? grew up in like a very hood-minded. My school was like last in education, last in test scores, number one in the country in basketball, but we were last in academics. And I didn't know anything about even the Holocaust growing up. Like I didn't, until I started studying Judaism, I had no idea of what the Schindler List was about, what the Anne Frank book was doing, and I had no connection to me. I was like, oh, wow, you know. So let alone knowing the connection between the different faiths during the time of the civil rights movement was just not. I was sold only the black stuff. So I can't say that it influenced it directly, but what I did notice was that one of the biggest things that I felt like connected me as I was learning the Hebrew text and Jewish scripture, if you will, was this ongoing, and studying Jewish history, which came after, was this ongoing relationship that the Jewish people were having with God. They just keep messing up. You know, I don't know if anybody ever read the thing has got to be so honest, like, because why would all these people hold on to a book where all it talks about is that you screw up all the time? That's all you're doing. Everybody messes up, your leaders all mess up, everybody screws up, the whole thing it's just like all your dirty laundry in a book. So when you're reading it, right, and you're seeing this beautiful relationship between the fact that God said still, even after all of this, He's never giving up, and at the end, He's going to restore everything, and there's going to be this. So reading that for me was sort of like, man, well, I mess up all the time, you know, let me in. I want to be a part of this also, you know, because, if anybody knows how to screw up, I got you, you know. So that was one of those things that, for me, made me feel like I could connect to this.
Aaron's giving me time check. I could sit here all night.
I can sit here all night. He said we could do another question.
So, sorry, one more.
We do a question, he's going to do one more song at the end, but you can also do a question.
Okay, so, we have 3 questions. How do I do this?
Rapid fire.
What?
Rapid fire?
Okay. I'll answer fast.
All right.
Kind of.
Go ahead.
Do you mind just talking a bit about your creative process and how your life trajectory has influenced?
That's a good question.
It's a great question.
Very good question. My workflow? Yeah. Okay, so I'm very big on meditation. Now, I don't always meditate every time before I write something, so I should clarify that. But a lot of what I do is like I try to draw back from that place of when I meditated that day and different things like that. And I hear music, and I usually start with music. I have a principle that comes right out of the book of Genesis that talks about that when the fish were created, they were created actually from the water. Right, that the water was in, and God created the fish from the water. So I have the idea that the beat is always the water. You have to have the water first before you can create the fish. The words, the melody, everything for me is always pulled from the music. So when I was younger, I would write without music and everything like that, and I have to like imagine something. But it always starts for me with the music. So generally, if I have it my way, I always am contemplating, and I spend the most time on how I'm going to say what I'm going to say. Cadence, melody, if applicable, as more so what I sit with more before I start to fill in the words. And then after I get from there, I start to think about what is it that the music is conveying to me. What should I be talking about on this? What emotions are coming out of me after that? And then I start to think about, as I'm writing the words, how are people going to feel when they hear it? I put myself in a but a fan, whatever, listener's perspective. And generally, even after I do something, I listen to them for a long time to hear if I'm convincing enough. If I really feel like when I said what I said, did it mean it? So I used to, when you're younger and you're rapper and you're rapping ciphers and stuff like that, you always think about bars. How am I going to say the most impressive thing I could possibly say? I don't ever think about that anymore. I gave up on that many years ago when I realized that it not only does it increase the writing, but you lose the connection piece. So if I'm not going to wow you, the main thing is that if I can hit a certain place. I would say music is a very, very interesting thing. If I have 2 to 3 minutes of a time, this is very deep, I'm going to say this, but you control a person for 2 or 3 minutes. They're sitting, they're all yours. Whatever you put inside of them at that point, it's going to be very, very crucial, because at that point you're controlling a person's emotions when you have music. Unfortunately, some people take this the wrong way. But when the music goes inside and you have an audience with somebody, even I'm not there, I'm not involved, the person just listening to the song. But at that point, I'm conveying and giving them messages, emotions, and I'm filling them up with something. So I don't take it lightly. So when I do it, I have to be conscious of what am I going to do? What chord do I want to strike inside of a person? So I think of all of these things when I write. Then, because I'm somewhat of a geek, and I started off my years inside of the studio from behind the doors, I'm thinking about how do I want it to be mixed? How do I want it to sound? How do I want the master to do? I want the engineer to do this. I want them to make it, so that's sort of my process.
Wow. We're going to have Nissim back for a Shabbaton. 24-hour extended Shabbaton.
Come on,
Do we need a Seder here? Would you guys come to the Passover Seder? Thank you so much. You're going to end with a song.
Yeah, we're going to do this.
And just wanted to say, such a pleasure to have this conversation with you. Interiority, brokenness, light, your creative process, Judaism, just so much to share in the past hour. And you've left us with a lot to think about.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you so much. Ready to come back already, guys. Please take me higher. Hey, please take me higher, higher. You know you're so special.